Hello, and welcome to Jeremy's Yorkshire Allotment Adventures, the Wednesday show. I was very generously yesterday given a greenhouse. It's 8 foot by 6 foot, and it's going to be positioned right here, right where my wildlife and wildflower bed was. It's going here because, well, it's very central. It gets a lot of sun, which will be rather lovely next year, and that'll go up in the next few weeks, so you're about to see me building my new greenhouse. I've broke a few panes of glass, but it's been outside for 10 years apparently, and the glass gets a bit frail and fragile. It's thin enough to start with. Hello. It's fascinating, isn't it, when you have the pieces of a greenhouse? I mean, it doesn't look very much here at all, but these are all the pieces that will make the greenhouse up. I've got some longer pieces sat down there. But how did the greenhouse become the greenhouse, what we know today? We've always had frames that grow and greenhouses. They were called greenhouses, but they weren't really the ones we know today. The structures that are mainly glass and very little frame. We're lucky because we have, well, this is aluminium, but you can get all sorts of structures for greenhouses. You can get wood, aluminium, cast iron. You can get plastics these days. And you don't have to have glass in them either. You can have plastic windows. You can even have inflatable greenhouses, or greenhouses that are just like a polytunnel. So it's come a long way. I love to think that all this started, this interest in pure glass, with a man called Joseph Paxton. He was born in 1803, although he lied at a very young age to become part of the workforce at Chiswick Gardens in London, and that's where the Royal Horticultural Society had their gardens, and he got a job as an under gardener there, tending the plants. And one day, by fate, he was leaving one of the areas through a door, in a rush as always, and he happened to bump into the 6th Duke of Devonshire, who had an interlocking door between his estate next door and the gardens at Chiswick. Well, they rolled down a hill together, believe it or not, a small embankment, I say a hill, a small embankment, and they became great friends. And because of his interest in light and the way he talked about plants and growing, the Duke of Devonshire within 3 or 4 months asked him to be head gardener at Chatsworth House. He was only 23 years old, and he gave him the money to ride first class from London in a horse and carriage. And the horse and carriage was called the Comet Coach. It was the fastest coach at that time, travelling a massive, eye-popping, scary 8 miles an hour. Yes, 8 miles an hour. It wasn't the most comfortable of journeys, even inside, but at least he was protected from the weather. He arrived up into Chesterfield, and he walked from Chesterfield to Chatsworth House, arriving at 4 o'clock in the morning. Of course, no one was there, but that's his start as the head gardener at Chatsworth House. And I only mention this because it's interesting. This is where he developed his love of the gardens, and he became one of our greatest engineers, even though people don't know much about him. He designed, I'm sure you may know this, the Crystal Palace in 1851 for the Great Exhibition, and this he just did bored in a meeting on the back of a napkin. And he could do this structure because he'd learnt his trade at Chatsworth House. He designed a massive conservatory for that time. And if you go to Chatsworth House, you may not even have noticed the foundations are still there. If you go up into the maze, and while you're running around the maze, on your way out, have a look at the wall that surrounds the maze. They're the original foundation blocks for this great conservatory. And it was glass. And it's the first time glass had been used in that way. Paxton found some glass manufacturer in Smethwick in Birmingham that could make glass, believe it or not, 4 feet long by 10 inches wide. 4 feet long, that was the biggest pane of glass at that time. It was record breaking. And it had 20,000 panes of glass made, brought from Smethwick. They had special wagons made for horses to be picked up from the local railway station and brought to Chatsworth. It lasted for years. Queen Victoria opened it, and it was there. It was a huge structure. It got waterfalls inside, fountains, tropical plants, banana plants, palm trees, rock formations. There were 4 ponds in there, heated tropical, because underneath were boilers. 11 miles of pipework, and it's still all underground at Chatsworth. They heated it 24 hours a day in coal wagons that were secretly born through the estate so that no one could see them underground. And Paxton played with light, with experiment. So if it hadn't been for Joseph Paxton, we wouldn't have the greenhouses we have today, because those greenhouses that were around at the time were mainly wood. Very, very little glass. If you look back, in fact, if you go to Chatsworth House again, where they have their record-breaking vines, where all their grapes grow, that is one of Paxton's original greenhouses. And you'll notice there that the structure is mainly wood still, and very little panes of glass. But over the years he developed that glass into how we are so lucky to be able to have massive big panes of glass in our structures. And once again, it's thanks to Joseph Paxton.